A 7-year-old boy leaps off a bunk bed in his grandparents' farmhouse, arms out, convinced for one glorious second that he can fly. He lands flat on his face. When he looks up, expecting comfort, his 4-year-old sister isn't crying for him. She's staring at him wide-eyed and says, "Do it again." That boy grew up to become Harvard researcher Shawn Achor, and that moment quietly shaped the question he'd spend his career answering. What if the way we respond to failure changes what we're capable of afterward? We've all been told success leads to happiness. Work hard, get the promotion, then you'll be happy. Achor's book, The Happiness Advantage, argues that formula has been backwards the whole time. Stay with me. This one rewires something most of us have believed our whole working lives. A simple truth to start. Happiness isn't the result of success. It's the precursor to it. For decades, the assumed formula ran one direction only. Work harder, achieve more, and happiness eventually arrives as the reward. Achor's research at Harvard found the causal arrow actually points the other way with far more force. A positive brain measurably outperforms a stressed or neutral one across nearly every metric that matters: creativity, productivity, resilience, even raw problem solving. Doctors primed into a positive state before diagnosing patients were faster and more accurate. Salespeople closed more deals. Students solved more problems correctly. The standard formula, achieve first and let happiness follow, turns out to be exactly backwards. The brain performing at its best needed the positive state as a precondition, not a reward handed out afterward. The fulcrum and the lever asterisk. Achor uses a simple image to explain how much control we actually have over our circumstances. The events of your life are a fixed lever, largely outside your control. But the fulcrum, where you choose to position your mindset in relation to those events, is entirely yours to move, and moving it even slightly changes how much power that same fixed lever can generate. Two people can face an identical setback, a layoff, a failed project, a harsh piece of feedback, and come away with wildly different outcomes, not because the event itself differed, but because their fulcrum, their internal frame for interpreting it, was positioned differently. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps, wrote that everything can be taken from a person but one thing: the freedom to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Achor's fulcrum is essentially that same idea, translated into the ordinary language of a deadline or a difficult colleague, rather than the extremity Frankl was describing. His point isn't that mindset makes hardship disappear. It's that the same objective lever, positioned against a differently placed fulcrum, produces dramatically more or less leverage from an identical amount of force. The Tetris effect. People who play the video game Tetris for extended periods report, days later, involuntarily seeing falling blocks in grocery store shelves and building windows. The brain, trained intensively on a specific pattern, keeps applying that pattern automatically long after the task has ended. Achor argues the same mechanism governs whether we scan our lives for problems or for opportunities, and crucially, it's trainable. Someone whose attention has been chronically trained to scan for what's wrong gets remarkably efficient at finding exactly that everywhere. Someone trained to scan for what's working becomes correspondingly efficient at finding that instead. His prescription is specific. Write down 3 new things you're grateful for every single day for 21 consecutive days. Not the same 3 repeated, new ones each time, forcing the brain to actively hunt for previously unnoticed positives. Achor's studies found this exercise measurably retrains the brain's default scanning pattern, with effects that persisted well beyond the 3 weeks themselves. The Zorro Circle. Facing something overwhelming, a massive project, a genuine crisis, people frequently give up entirely, precisely because the scale feels too large for any single action to meaningfully address. Achor names this pattern after the fictional Zorro, whose teacher in the story didn't start his training against a dozen opponents at once. He first drew a small circle in the dirt and had him master control within that tiny space alone, before gradually widening it as competence accumulated. The practical application. When something feels unmanageable, deliberately shrink the immediate goal down to something small enough to complete today. One paragraph written, one email sent, one conversation had, rather than the entire overwhelming project looming behind it. Success at that genuinely small scale doesn't just complete a minor task. It restores a sense of control that makes the next, slightly larger circle considerably more approachable. The 20-second rule. Willpower, Achor's research suggests, is a limited, exhaustible resource, not an unlimited reserve of character, and trying to power through every good habit purely through determination is a losing long-term strategy. His solution focuses instead on the physical environment surrounding a habit, reducing the activation energy required to start a good habit by just 20 seconds, keeping running shoes by the door instead of in a closet, measurably increased how consistently people followed through. Adding 20 seconds of friction to a bad habit, putting the remote in a drawer across the room, measurably decreased how often people gave into it. The lesson isn't that willpower doesn't matter. It's that it's most efficiently spent once, up front, redesigning the environment, rather than relied on fresh every single day. Social investment. Under real pressure, most people instinctively withdraw from relationships to focus more narrowly on the crisis at hand. Achor's data, drawn partly from studying soldiers under genuine combat stress, found this instinct is almost precisely backwards. Social support was one of the strongest predictors of both resilience during a crisis and successful recovery afterward. For far more ordinary stress, a demanding deadline, a hard week, the instinct to cancel the coffee with a friend in order to focus entirely on the problem is usually exactly the wrong move. Relationships function as one of the most powerful available resources for getting through pressure, not a distraction from it. Asterisk falling up. Not every setback is a hidden blessing, and Achor pushes back against shallow positivity that pretends real hardship doesn't hurt. What his research does support is more specific. People who actively look for a genuine path forward through adversity, rather than simply absorbing a setback as a verdict on their capability, recover measurably faster and often end up further ahead than they would have without the setback at all, a pattern he calls falling up. The mechanism isn't magical thinking. It's a specific habit of searching for what a difficult experience made possible that wouldn't have been possible otherwise, a skill developed, a wrong direction ruled out clearly enough to redirect effort more effectively. The benefit comes specifically from identifying a real, concrete gain, not from repeating a vague, generic silver lining. There's a widely told account of Thomas Edison, who, after a fire destroyed a significant portion of his laboratory, reportedly told his son the disaster had genuine value, because it had just cleared away years of accumulated mistakes and given them a fresh start. Whether Edison's calm in that exact moment was quite as complete as the story suggests, the underlying principle is precisely Achor's point. Actively searching for the specific, real opening a setback creates, rather than only cataloging what it destroyed. A full example, one ordinary Monday. Picture someone waking up dreading a Monday full of meetings and a deadline that's been generating dread for a week. The old formula says push through, survive, and allow relief only once the deadline is behind them. Achor's research suggests revering the sequence changes the day. Before checking a single email, 3 minutes, 3 specific things worth genuine gratitude from the past day, training the scanning pattern toward what's working before the inbox trains it toward what's broken. Facing the deadline, draw the smallest possible Zorro circle, not finish the project, but write the first paragraph, small enough that starting requires almost no activation energy. And when the instinct arrives to cancel lunch with a colleague to buy back 30 minutes, the social investment research argues directly against it. Keep the lunch, because the relationship is a resource, not a distraction from one. None of these moves is dramatic on its own. That's the point. The happiness advantage isn't one large gesture. It's a handful of small, deliberately reordered defaults, applied consistently enough to change what an ordinary Monday actually produces. Why companies started paying attention. Achor's research didn't stay confined to academic journals. Organizations applying it directly saw measurable results in real workplaces, not just laboratory settings. Sales teams given a brief, deliberate positive intervention before calls, just a few minutes of a gratitude exercise, produced measurably higher close rates over the following weeks than teams that skipped it. Healthcare organizations applying similar principles reported reduced burnout alongside improved patient interactions. Now let's be honest. Achor's research is genuinely rigorous, but some of the specific effect sizes in his more popular conference talk framing may be somewhat more optimistic than the underlying studies strictly support, a pattern common across positive psychology more broadly. His examples also lean heavily corporate, Harvard classrooms, Fortune 500 trainings, contexts where someone has real latitude to redesign their schedule and environment. Someone working multiple jobs with no flexibility isn't equally positioned to apply several of these techniques, and the book's uniformly upbeat tone doesn't always make adequate room for that difference in circumstance. There's a second limitation worth naming plainly. Someone working multiple jobs with no schedule flexibility, or facing genuine structural barriers rather than simply an unhelpful mindset, is not equally positioned to apply several of these techniques, and the book's uniformly upbeat tone doesn't always make adequate room for that difference in circumstance. It's also worth separating two different-sized claims here. That happiness precedes and drives better performance on tasks like creativity and problem-solving is well supported by the cited research. That it fully explains larger outcomes like wealth or career advancement, which depend on countless structural and circumstantial factors, is a considerably bigger leap than the book's confident tone sometimes suggests. Even with those caveats, the core reversal holds up well. Chasing achievement first and hopping happiness eventually follows produces neither reliably for most people, while deliberately cultivating gratitude, small wins, and genuine connection tends to produce both, and considerably sooner. The takeaway: stop waiting for the achievement to arrive before allowing yourself the positive state that actually helps produce it. Notice what your attention has been trained to scan for, and retrain it deliberately with 3 new gratitudes a day. When something feels too large, shrink it to a circle small enough to master today. Redesign your environment once, rather than relying on willpower fresh every day. And under real pressure, invest more in your relationships, not less. Shawn Achor's sister, standing at the bottom of that bunk bed, didn't know she was demonstrating a research finding that would eventually take her brother to Harvard. She just knew, instinctively, that how you respond to falling down matters more than the fall itself. Do it again, she said. As it turns out, the research agrees with her.